All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of In-Depth Review. Yes, this is where I take a product, generally D&D products, and just go into an almost pedantic examination of the things I think they do right, the things I think they maybe don't do as well, and I give my recommendation about whether or not I think you should buy it, depending on what kind of a RPG enthusiast you are. So, when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. The last one I did was almost to 2 hours long. This one, because it's just a campaign setting and not an entire new RPG system, is probably going to be a little bit slower, but most people don't want to sit through an hour or an hour and a half a long video just to find out if they should buy something. So I always start these off with, should you buy it? I generally split people up that would buy this into 3 different groups. You have RPG players, which are people that primarily play as a player character when they are playing an RPG. They don't tend to do a lot of GMing or DMing. They're mostly a player. There's a lot of those. The second group is GMs. GMs have an entirely different set of things they look for in a supplement, and certain things that are useful for GMs are not going to be useful for players, though most things that are useful for players are also going to be useful for GMs. And then finally, the last group I call lore hounds, or just fans. These are people that are neither going to play as a player or run a game as a GM. They just like the lore. They just like the product itself. There are a lot of people like this. It doesn't make them any lesser or greater than anyone else. They just have a different way of enjoying things, and because of that, they may get more or less out of certain products. So, if you hadn't guessed by the title of this, today I am reviewing Tal'Dorei campaign setting Reborn. Quick, I guess you could call it disclaimer. I bought this from Green Ronin Publishing when it first came out. This is the first version of the Tal'Dorei campaign setting. I really enjoyed it, so I am going to have a bias about this because I already owned the previous version of this product and I really liked it. So take my recommendations with a grain of salt. So the actual should you buy it section. First things first, for players, the things that most players tend to get the most out of an RPG product are player options. You know, new subclasses, new spells, new feats, new backgrounds. Just about everything that is published for D&D has some player options. Even adventures that are designed almost solely for GMs will a lot of times have new backgrounds into the things like that can be used by players. Does that mean all players should buy them? Probably not. For this one specifically, there is a lot here for a player. Specifically, if you're going to be a player that is going to be playing in a Tal'Dorei campaign or any campaign that's set in Exandria. There's already a Wildmount campaign setting that was officially published through Wizards of the Coast. You have the Tal'Dorei campaign setting, and I would be very, very surprised if after the most recent campaign that just started this past year, I would be really, really surprised if they didn't release a campaign setting for that combat, the Marquesian continent, I think is what it's called. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you could be in an Exandria, that's the whole world campaign. And as a player, Chapter 4 is called Character Options, and there is so much here. Like, seriously, you have what you would expect. You have subclasses. There's 2, 4, 6, 8. There are 9 subclasses. The original book had 4. So 4 of the subclasses are effectively kind of updated reprints of what was in here. I've looked through a few of them that already existed, and they have been updated, which is good. I've mentioned when I covered the Tal'Dorei subclasses before, the one problem with the Tal'Dorei subclasses is they never got any revisions, other than the Cobalt Soul, and that was because it was used on Critical Role. But they never got any revisions, and so it just they weren't very well balanced. There's only so much balancing you can do with playtesting. The rest of your balancing has to come from real people actually playing the classes. That's why we constantly get errata from Wizards of the Coast. That's why most of the stuff on the D&D or the Dungeon Masters Guild has multiple versions. It's just that's how it works. So I'm very happy to say I've looked through them. They're really, really nice. They have quite a few different backgrounds that are super cool. They have new feats that are really, really awesome. And then just for things like they have an entire section on races and cultures. A lot of players don't think about this, but I think it is an essential part of being a good player, is understanding how your character fits into the role. And the races and cultures section really gives you a lot of information about how your race and the culture that is around that race, depending on where you were born, will influence how your character sees the world. And that's a really important thing of playing in an RPG, is just understanding how your character interprets the world instead of how you interpret the world. And so yeah, it is just really, really, really great. In addition to that, there's a bunch of other kind of lore stuff in here. All of that stuff can be used to create much more interesting, unique backstories and the things like that that'll just make you that much more attached to your character. So for players, do I recommend that you buy this? Absolutely, 100% yes. I think this is a really, really solid investment for players. Moving on to GMs. Again, GMs, the new player options are going to be useful to the GMs just because your players are going to want to use them. So that's always going to be something that's nice. However, something that is significantly more useful to GMs is a world to be able to run in. And this campaign setting does it so well. Like, seriously, it is... We've seen this in the Eberron campaign setting, where what they would do is they would show you a map. Again, I think maps are really, really important in role-playing games as part of your campaign book, because it makes the world that much more real. It lets the players be able to go, oh, can we go over here? We've never been over here. And I hate making maps. I really, really do. I'm not good at it. But I know that they're an essential part. And the book itself should come, from what I understand, it does come with a fold-out map of Tal'Dorei, which I'm really, really excited about, because the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting did come with a fold-out map, and I unfortunately damaged mine in my previous room. I have it on the floor. It had fallen over from somewhere. I had it on the floor, and I just ripped it to shreds. And I really, really got upset about it, because something was very important to me. And so I ordered the book. The book, if you order through Critical Role, the Critical Role shop, you get a free PDF of the book. So I have the PDF, and then my book is being shipped to me. And as soon as I get that map again, I'm going to be very, 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 very happy, because the map is amazing. But the thing I really, really like about the map, and specifically something that is for GMs, is I believe it's the Tal'Dorei Gazetteer. What it is it just describes a bunch of different locations in the game, and I'm actually going to bring up a couple of these just so I can remember. So what it does is it brings up a bunch of different locations, and it gives you descriptions and, size of the towns and things like that. But my absolute favorite part of this, which is an essential thing if you're a GM that you want to run adventures in Tal'Dorei is at the end of every one of these places, they'll have a thing that says, like for Drinna, which is a town on the Lycidian coast. Right towards the end of Drinna, the Drinna section is Drinna Adventures. And what they do is they give you a couple story hooks that you can use to start adventures in that area. And that is incredibly useful. As a forever DM, if I'm reading a campaign setting or something like that, and they just give me a bunch of locations, I'm like, okay, that's cool. But when they tell me, oh, by the way, these are some of the adventures that you might want to have, these hooks that they give you do not give you like full out, you do this, you do this, you do this. They're just brief little descriptions of, hey, this is happening and this might interest the players. So it's not like they're giving you all these adventures. No, they're giving you story hooks, which is a perfect starting point for you to write an adventure. And they have all the information you need there to be able to kind of fill in all the details that you need. So I really, really, really like that. They do have them split up into 4 different levels. You have low level, mid level, high level, and then epic. And that just corresponds to the 4 tiers in 5th edition. Tier 1, 1 to 4. Tier 2, 5 to 10. Tier 3, 11 to 16. Tier 4, 17 to 20. All of these are incredibly good. Now, for DMs and GMs that don't like running in other people's worlds, where they want to run their own worlds. I know a lot of people like this. I personally am like this. I'm not against running things in the Forgotten Realms or in Tal'Dorei or anything like that, but both the campaigns I'm running right now are in my own custom world. So does that mean all this stuff is useless for you? No. Looking over these adventures, just because it's set in this fictional city that doesn't exist in yours, doesn't mean you can't take the basic idea of what the adventure is and go, hey, I can totally use that in my campaign. And that's something I think more GMs and DMs need to be aware of, is this idea that I can use these things in my campaign. I change a few things, but these are perfect little templates that I can just take out a couple of the specifics and then put them into my own campaign. And being able and having the ability to understand how to template something is essential to being a good game master or dungeon master. And so I think this is a perfect example of that. So, for GMs, do I believe that this is a solid purchase for GMs? Absolutely, 100% yes. In addition to all that story stuff, there's also a bunch of new magic items. There's some optional campaign rules. Specifically, they have 3 different versions of how to treat death in your campaign. For those people that think death is just too easy in 5th edition to get around and it's just a minor setback. They have optional rules that make it a little bit more weighty and a little bit more interesting. So overall, it is definitely a buy for GMs. Finally, for lore hounds, do I really need to say it? Absolutely. The first chapter is just history and myths of Tal'Dorei. This is literally the first chapter you can read like a novel. Like, it is super, super well written. The book itself is gorgeous. Like, the artists that they got for this are absolutely astounding in just how good everything looks. The layouts themselves are beautifully done. Matt Mercer has always put out really pretty stuff. Like, even if you look at his early DMs Guild stuff, it always looks pretty. This is a level beyond that. It looks pretty. There is so much lore that you can just sink your teeth into. The very, very end of the book, they have chapter 6 is Allies and Adversaries of Tal'Dorei. We'll talk about that when I get into the the in-depth version. But for those of you that are lore hounds or are just fans of Critical Role, the last section of chapter 6 is entitled Vox Machina, and it talks about every member of Vox Machina. It gives every one of them a stat block, and it talks about what happened after the campaign ended. And I will admit I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't expecting it. Despite the fact that I should have known it was going to be there, I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't expecting it. And when I read all of it, I was instantly taken back to, fun fact, Critical Role, the first episode premiered, I believe it was either on my birthday or the day after my birthday. But it was right around my birthday, within a day or so. And I was instantly taken back to that day, sitting in my chair, watching this group of people. I had no idea who they are. I had no idea that I was going to become so invested in this world. And it took me back to that moment where they got their first, how do you want to do this? And we had our first Scanlan song. And like, it was so nice to just kind of see this, and just the care and effort that was put forward into them, and that section just, for me, was worth the entire book. Just that tiny little, I think the section is only about 15 or 16 pages. It's not a very long. The whole book itself is almost 280 pages. So, yeah. So for lore hounds and fans, I don't need to tell you this. You're going to buy the book anyway. But if you wanted someone to tell you that you should buy the book, you should buy the book. It is probably the best campaign setting I have seen published as of yet. Despite the fact that it's not published by Wizards of the Coast, I would say this is vastly superior. This is vastly superior to Strixhaven. Just because Strixhaven was more of an adventure book with a campaign setting kind of in it, but it was mostly an adventure. I would say the last big campaign setting I saw them release, other than the Wildmount campaign setting, which was good, but I always thought that Eberron was just a better book. I just got more out of it. This is better than Eberron. It is so beautifully made, and yeah. It's great. So, those are my recommendations about actually buying the book. Now, for those of you that for some odd reason have nothing better to do than listen to me ramble on, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the in-depth review. So, Chapter 1. Welcome to Tal'Dorei. Like I said before, well, I guess first things first, I should mention the preface. There is a preface. It's written by Matt Mercer. It's beautiful. It is absolutely wonderful. In my last in-depth review that went up yesterday, I made mention of just how nice it was to have Zordon preface the book. Well, I mean, Matt Mercer is the Zordon of Critical Role. He really is. And it's a great little preface. You should read it a couple of times. It's very well written because it's Matt Mercer. And it's great. It's very, very nice. So, with that being said, Chapter 1 gives you a really, really nice overview of Tal'Dorei itself. Tal'Dorei actually refers to a bunch of different things in Critical Role. And the first thing that it mentioned in Welcome to Tal'Dorei is what those three things are. Tal'Dorei counts as a continent. It is an actual continent that has a bunch of different societies on it. It also refers to the Republic of Tal'Dorei, which is the largest society there, the largest country, quote unquote, there. And then it also refers to a woman named Zan Tal'Dorei, who was whose name is what the entire continent is named after, and she was a huge heroic figure, and her story is in this first section. Something that I was completely unaware of was just where the name Tal'Dorei came from. So that being said, it does talk about the various nations in here. You have the Republic of Tal'Dorei, the Ashari, Craghammer, Singorn, and then the Iron Authority. I was familiar with all of those, except for some odd reason I had completely forgotten about the Iron Authority. I can't remember. I can't remember if it even showed up in Kika Campaign 1. There are a lot of references to Campaign 2 in this book. Yeah, it is written after Campaign to the 2, so there's a fair amount of things in there. Then it has a what's in this book section, just tells you, it's an illustrated table of contents effectively. Chapter 1 says this, Chapter 2 says this, so that's really what it is. And then something that I think is really, really useful, and it's something I've been meaning to do for my campaign setting, and just because it takes effort, I haven't, but they have a calendar. They have a calendar for Exandria that has different months. Each month has different number of days. They have a bunch of holidays built into it that they talk about. It is absolutely wonderful. They talk about the different moons that exist. These are all things that are great for world building. And then they talk about the different planes, and then they get into the actual history of Tal'Dorei, which, again, really, really good, interesting stuff. You can read this like a book. It's so, so good. And there's so much more here than I was expecting. They do have history effectively of what happens in Campaign 1. If you haven't watched Campaign 1 and you're planning on doing that, probably the chapter entitled Tal'Dorei Ascendant, you may want to skip that because it does talk about really big plot points. And then it starts talking about running a Tal'Dorei campaign and the different things that you need to be aware of, and the kind of the different forces at work into the Tal'Dorei, which is another thing that's really, really essential when you are building your own campaign setting, is understand what forces are in work in your campaign setting. It's something that I put a very large emphasis on because I like the idea of conflicts that arise from power struggles as opposed to conflicts that arise from combat or warfare or something like that. I am really, really into politics and things like that in my campaigns, and having, unreliable narrators and lies and deceit and things like that fuel a lot of the things. And people that don't realize that what they're telling the players is a lie because they believe it, because they've been lied to by someone else. All of that is really nice. And so the section Secrets of Tal'Dorei is all about all these different things that might influence your campaign. Not every single campaign needs to have huge politics and espionage, in addition to, massive wars and stuff like that. Each one's a little different, but having all those stuff laid out for your campaign setting is really nice, because then as the players play, you can kind of go wherever they want. And because you already have these power sources there, when they start interacting, you just have to go, oh, well, if they do this, then this power source will see it this way and this one will see it that way. And the stories write themselves. So, yeah, love that. So, yeah, that is Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Allegiances of Tal'Dorei. This is, I like how they named this particular chapter, specifically because it covers so many different things. You have your Pantheon here, which, for those of you that don't know, I believe Matt Mercer originally for Critical Role, because it was originally a Pathfinder game. It transferred over to 5th edition before they started just streaming it. And originally he didn't have his own custom Pantheon. He used, trying to remember what it's called. I think it's called the Chaos War pantheon. It's a standard pantheon in a bunch of different RPGs, most of them D&D based. When Critical Role started to become its own thing, he effectively created his own pantheon, which is different from the kind of standard one that he just borrowed, but has to have some references, because if you watch campaign 1, you will notice like one of the deities that is mentioned often in campaign 1 is the Raven Queen, which is from that standard pantheon that he just borrowed. The Raven Queen doesn't exist in this pantheon if you just look at the names. However, there is a deity called the Matron of Ravens, and that you will see a lot of in here is, especially the ones that showed up in campaign 1, he changed their names, but it's basically the same things. Like Bahamut is a huge thing in D&D in general. Here he's called the Platinum Dragon, which anyone that knows D&D lore will recognize it's Bahamut. But again, Matt wanted to have his own domain for a lot of different reasons, probably the least of which was kick a copyright. But it probably was one of the reasons. And they're a really, really great pantheon. They are different than the one that inspired it, which I like. And they fit. You know, they're good deities. The other thing that I like about this first section, every single deity has their own little blurb. It takes up half a page, and at the bottom of every single one, you see the holy symbol for each one of these deities, and they're really, really great. Holy symbols are super, super useful in D&D in general, not only because they are used as spellcasting focuses for most divine magic, but by having specific holy symbols that your players are aware of, know what they look like, you can hide those holy symbols in structures and the things like that. And instead of saying, oh, you see the holy symbol for the Arc Heart, you can go, well, as you're exploring these ruins, you do see a motif where you see two crescents that are married facing each other with a cross behind them. Well, that is a description of the symbol of the Arc Heart, but by describing it by its physical appearance, instead of instantly saying, oh, it's the Arc Heart, or even just taking bits and pieces of it, like, well, there are two crescents that are married at their front, and saying that you see that symbol, the players themselves get to go, wait a minute, that sounds really familiar. How similar is that to the Arc Heart holy symbol? Well, it's very similar. And you can do other things, like perhaps this is, instead of this being people that worship the Arc Heart, perhaps this is a cult that has decided that the Arc Heart is a false god or something, and they worship the true Arc Heart. And so their holy symbol looks very, very similar to the Arc Heart, but they're different things. And just by having a holy symbol that every player can look at, you can do things like that. It's one of the fun things that I get to do in Realms of the Wild, is the Sheikah and the Yiga clan both use almost the same symbol for their representation. The difference is, I believe the Sheikah symbol actually has a tear underneath the eye. One of them does. I can never remember which one. I always have to have the players to tell me. Generally Elias, because he knows a lot more than I do. But I'm able to just make descriptions of these, and then go, wait a minute, that sounds like a Yiga clan symbol. Is from my knowledge of the Yiga clan, how similar is that? Well, it bears a striking resemblance, though it has these minor differences. And that's a really great way to give the players a little bit of agency, to reward players for, really listening and to the thinking. And it allows you to create little subsects and things like that. So, yes, I'm a huge fan of holy symbols. Holy symbols are great. My deities do not have anywhere near enough holy symbols. and I need to draw them out eventually, or I need to pay someone to draw them for me, to be blunt. But because there's just so much useful in having physical holy symbols. So anyway, yeah, they go through the pantheon, and then they go through the betrayer gods, which are basically their negative pantheon. And again, just like everything else, they have symbols of every single one of the gods, and I love it. It's really, really well done. Yeah, it's really, really great. There's a bunch of lore here. And then they also have what they call lesser idols, which are just not quite gods, but the things that might be basically lesser gods. If you're familiar with like the general pantheon of Forgotten Realms, you have greater gods and lesser gods. It's kind of what these things are. And it's great. It's absolutely amazing. Once you get done with the Pantheon, they go Factions and Societies, which is just a master class in how to create a living, breathing world. Every nation of the world in all of history have had factions that vie for control. Every single one of them. If you think of the modern United States, most people, when they think, well, what are the factions that are trying to control it? Most people will just instantly go, well, the Democrats and Republicans. Obviously, those are the two factions that are trying to control. And to a point, yeah, they do exert some control. But there are so many other factions that people don't even think of as factions. But if I say their names, they will instantly know what I'm referring to. Big Pharma, Big Business, Big Tech. And each one of those factions has sub-factions. Amazon versus Microsoft versus Facebook. Or Alphabet versus Amazon versus Metaverse. These factions vie for control using various different things. Same thing is true about any culture. And so by having different factions, and this is one of the things that I really, really like about this. So they will describe one of the factions. The first one they talk about is the Tal'Dorei Council. It is a faction that is vying for control of Tal'Dorei. It makes perfect sense. After they describe it, they will say the goals of the faction. This is an extremely important part of building some sort of faction, is having it have goals. Even if the players are never aware of what those goals are, every group has goals. And a lot of times what the public thinks their goals are is not what they actually are. And so it's really important that if you're going to develop factions, you should always have just a description of the faction. You should have goals. And they also will list important positions within the faction. And then after that, they have relationships, which is another really important. How does this faction interact with other factions? And finally, they have figures of interest, which is specific people that have power within the faction. So this is a perfect example of how to build factions. Do you need to be as detailed as they have here? No. But if you're going to build factions for your own campaign, and again, this is why I say it's so important to understand how to template something that you read in a book. This is the template you should use. You should have a description of the faction itself. What is the faction? You should have their goals. You should have their relationships with other factions, and then you should have figures of interest. You should have people that are important in that faction. If you have those things, and your figures of interest might just be the head of the faction. Or what you could do, and this is something that I do constantly in my games because I want my players to be able to effectively write some of the lore of the game as we play. You can just put titles in there of, okay, well, this is the head of the faction, it's called this, but forget the description. and just put titles, and then as the players play, they will eventually have to deal with, okay, well, I think they're going to do this. And in that moment, you can create the character on your own, just on the fly. You can have the players create the character together as a very collaborative version. Or you can just have like pre-made characters that you have just lying around. And when they come in, they go, okay, well, now I've got, the Master of Commerce of Tal'Dorei is here. And they're going to talk with them. Okay, I'm going to pick this person. Okay, this person is now the Master of Commerce. And it becomes a very easy to do things. So again, if you're a dungeon master, a game master, and you're like, I'm never going to run a campaign in Tal'Dorei, why the hell would I ever use this? Learn how to template. Read these as a template so that you can create a better version of your own world. And like I said, this is a master class in how to create factions. The various factions, another thing that's really, really nice is there are people that belong to multiple factions. This is another thing that some people will sometimes not understand. Just because you have allegiance to a single faction doesn't mean you can't have allegiances to other ones. Even competing factions have people that are involved in both. Sometimes implicitly, sometimes out in the open, sometimes they are secretly in league with both, where they're cheating on one with the other, or they may be working both sides against each other for their own means. But never assume that because someone is a part of one faction that they somehow aren't a part of another. And that's another thing that I really enjoy about this. There are quite a few different characters that show up in multiple factions. And because each faction has a goal, that means the character has to weigh their allegiance to the different factions when those goals become when those goals get set against each other. And that makes for really great story to the telling. And your players can have an impact, especially in those instances where someone belongs to two factions. The factions are butting heads against each other. Your players can be the one that influences the person in dual factions about which faction they should choose in this particular instance. And if things go well, that might reinforce this NPC's relationship with that faction. Or if things go poorly, it may ruin that NPC's relationship with that faction, and it might get them completely taken out of the faction. It may make them disillusioned with the faction. It may make them disillusioned with the player for ruining their relationship with a faction they really liked. There's so much that can happen by just having a few NPCs that belong to multiple factions. Super, super fun, especially if they're high ranking in multiple factions. So never assume that all factions have to be mutually exclusive. They don't, and they shouldn't be. So yeah, there's a ton of different factions in here. If you watch the first campaign, a lot of these will be very, very familiar to you. A few of them are unique. Like I don't remember hearing them before, but they make total sense. And they do mention the Library of the Cobalt Soul, despite the fact that that's a Wildmount thing. They're all over the world. So again, that's a campaign 2 reference. Yeah, and then they have different symbols and heraldry for each of the factions, which again, symbology is really, really important. It's really, really nice. So yeah, that is chapter 2. Chapter 3, the Tal'Dorei Gazetteer. This effectively just talks about a bunch of different settlements. Basically, this talks about a bunch of different places that are all going to be on your map that comes with the thing. If you want to know what the map looks like, this is the old version of the map. And as you can see, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous map. I'm assuming it will probably look relatively similar, though probably even prettier than that one, because they've had quite a few years to improve it. But that's what this entire chapter 3 is about, is just different places. But like I said, every one of them has story hooks. And in the very beginning of chapter 3, it talks about story hooks. And it specifically says for low-level characters, 1st to 4th. For mid-level, 5th to 10th. For high-level, 11 to 16. For epic level, 17 to 20. And then additionally, some plot hooks are marked any level. And yeah, and then it just jumps into it. You have the Lycidian coast. And there's just so much here. So much like anyone anyone that is familiar with Campaign 1 will know the name Stilben. Stilben was the little city that the campaign started in. This is the equivalent of like Daggerford. If you're used to playing games in the Forgotten Realm, Daggerford is a really, really common place to start adventures because it's a little bit smaller, but it's still big enough to be a decent sized city. Or maybe kind of an even better comparison would be something like Red Larch, which is a small city in the Forgotten Realms. It's just off the Sword Coast. Stilben is effectively the Red Larch. And this is where Campaign 1 started. And they even have a little aside in there that says Origins of Vox Machina. And it talks about how Stilben it talks about how Vox Machina first met in Stilben, and their first adventure was in the Catal Swamp. Both locations that you can have right here that is described. It breaks down the population of the town. It gives a little map that tells you where all the different things are. It is great. And it goes on from there. Like every different place has just a ton of information about it. And most of the bigger cities do have a map. Like I don't see a map of Zephyra. Which is a really important city, because that's where Keyleth is from. But it's a significantly smaller town. Like Stilben is a relatively small town. It has a population of 10,000 people. Zephyra has a population of 1,300. So it is a very, very small town. Whereas compare that to Whitestone, which has a population of 17th of 1,000. And has its own map, and even Whitestone is a relatively smaller city compared to some of the larger ones as you get further in. Like Kymel has 29,000 people. I'm trying to look for Westrun. Westrun was one of the really, really big cities. That's 51,000 people. Again, really, really big place. And Westrun has its own map. Craghammer, 73,000. They're basically, it's almost like they're going from small to large as you go through here. I'm just trying to find Tal'Dorei itself so I can specifically mention how big Tal'Dorei is. There is so much here. It is mind-blowing, just the massive amount of stuff in this book. And yeah, like I said, if you want to to run a campaign here, you will not run out of stuff to do, to be blunt. There's just so much here, and it's so pretty. There's Singhorn, which is a really, really pretty city. Iman, that is the capital of Tal'Dorei, is Iman. Population of 365,000. So when you compare Amman to even Westrun, which is a pretty big city, no comparison. Amman is just massive. And because of that, it has a pretty massive map. The map for Amman takes up a page. And again, it is gorgeous in its detail. So yeah, I mean, I without getting into too much stuff that I would consider, I guess spoilers would be the best thing. Um, the whole chapter 3 is brilliant. Every or almost every single place that they mention on there, they have adventure hooks that would give your players a reason to do things and gives you a kind of an idea of something fun that could happen there. And you can build an entire campaign by just having your players go, let the players pick where they want to go, give them the map, let them go wherever they want, and whenever you get to a new place, you look at the story hooks and go, this one sounds cool, and you introduce that story hook. And after about 4 or 5 of those, you will have an interesting plot line to continue the rest of your campaign around. So yeah, overall, it's really, really well written. Like I said, even if you never ever, like you don't even like Critical Role, you wish it didn't exist, this is still a good book to buy, if for no other reason than you can use it to template a lot of your own adventures, which takes a lot of the weight off of being a dungeon master. I've seen a lot of people that kind of look down on people that use pre-written content and stuff. Well, you're not a real dungeon master. Shut up. There's a difference between working hard and working smart, and this is how you work smart. I had a boss. It's probably the worst boss I've ever worked for in my life. I will not say what company they worked for. I will say we caught them doing things that violated labor laws, like serious jail time kind of stuff. That wasn't the worst aspect of this boss. The worst aspect of this boss is they did everything themselves. They were literally the hardest working boss I have ever had because they were constantly doing things. But they never delegated anything. They always had to do absolutely everything themselves. They never accepted any help. They were absolutely the worst boss I've ever worked for. And the store that I worked for them in tanked. It was absolutely atrocious how poorly the store did under their management until effectively I took over the store without them knowing. So anyone that claims that, oh, I'm a real dungeon master, I write everything from scratch, I don't take inspiration from everything else. First things first, that's a lie. You always take inspiration from everything. Second point, you are a dumb dungeon master if you actively refuse things that will make your job easier. You already do more work than your players 100%, or maybe like 99% of the time. There are a few people that I have played with where the players actually put a significant amount of effort into the campaign. But for the most part, it's the dungeon masters that do it. And if you are actively making your job more difficult by refusing to look at what other people do and take inspiration from it, which isn't illegal, which isn't immoral, it is absolutely what everybody in the world does. The hero's journey is a template, effectively, for telling a story. How many themes and subjects from Shakespeare's work show up again and again and again and again and again and again and again? Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw has been used over and over and over and over and over again. The Prince and the Pauper idea has been used over and over and over and over and over again. Why in the world would you make your life that much harder by not using information that is readily available and is designed for you to use? Anyone that tells you that real dungeon masters don't use pre-written content is lying to you. I am a real dungeon master. I'm a pretty darn good one, and I take inspiration from pre-written content all the time. I run pre-written adventures all the time. Oh, I used to. I don't do it as much because I don't do Adventures League stuff. But the amount of stuff that I learned from running Adventures League adventures, which you have literally no control over as a game master, you can only do what is in the document. And even then, I was able to find interesting ways to kind of customize things within their very, very strict rules. And it made me a better dungeon master. So yes, use this. It's amazing stuff. Moving on to chapter 4. Character options. I'm going to say right now, most of the character options in here are going to have a D&D deep dive on them. I think there's only one or two. Like, even the ones like the Barbarian Path of the Juggernaut. Path of the Juggernaut is in here. Path of the Juggernaut, I think I've actually done a D&D Beyond on, or a D&D deep dive on. I'll have to look again, because it's another fun thing about having like 150 episodes of D&D deep dive. I don't actually remember all the things I do. So every so often I will go back into my playlist and just look through and go, did I do this yet? But anyway, Path of Juggernaut, I got my book out and I opened it up to Path of Juggernaut and I looked at the Path of Juggernaut in here just to see how much it changed. It's a completely different subclass. They only change a few things in there, but the changes themselves are large enough that it plays completely differently, and the new version of the Path of Juggernaut is a lot better than the old one. So yes, the character options that I've gone through in here, all of them are interesting. All of them are fun. For the most part, I believe some like Way of the Cobalt Soul and Paladin Oath the Open Sea, both of those are in D&D Beyond. The versions that are in this book are near identical to the ones that you have on D&D Beyond. So those I probably won't do D&D deep dives on, because I've done deep dives on them and there's not a ton of changes. I will say Oath of the Open Sea does get some new spells that were created specifically for this that are really, really cool that you should check out. But yeah, overall, the subclasses are really, really interesting. They have a bunch of backgrounds, which again, I have to emphasize this. All these backgrounds are specific to Tal'Dorei. The Clasp member is specifically a member of one of the factions that was introduced earlier in the book. If the Clasp doesn't exist in your campaign, does that mean you can't use that background? No, you template it. The background features are still interesting, and you just need to change a few things to get it to fit into your campaign. So again, if you don't want to run a Critical Role campaign, that does not mean none of these are useful. All of these are useful. You just have to learn how to template them. They do have a lot of flavor in here, like things about different ancestries and the things like that. Like they talk about the different races, which we now call ancestries because the word race has become a hot button word now, despite the fact that fantasy races have nothing to do with what we consider race in our modern society. They're completely different entities. People like to conflate the two and try to make people say things that they really didn't. So the ancestries are interesting, and there's a lot of lore here. And again, if you're running a Tal'Dorei campaign, this can be very, very useful for you. If you're not running a Tal'Dorei campaign, again, you can still use ideas of this, of just, the different versions of ancestries that you might have in your own campaign. Again, you don't have to copy things word for word, but you can sit there and go, oh, so this kind of makes sense, and maybe I want to have something like that in my own campaign. More ancestry stuff like that. Like again, the amount of effort that they put in to really telling you how these ancestries fit into the world is really, really nice. And I like that because, again, it makes it that much easier for players to be able to build their own backstories that feel important. A lot of people think limitations are always a bad thing. They can be, but a lot of times limitations can actually inspire creativity. That is the entire point of like the classical period of music. The Baroque period of music, to get into music history for you, the Baroque period of music was entirely about writing rules and then following them. The classical period of music was taking those rules and making sure that you follow them, but making sure you do it in the most interesting and unique way possible. The entire purpose of the classical period of music was using limitations to inspire your creativity. And then you get to the Romantic period, which was literally fuck all your rules. I do what I want, and that is how art. That is how art forms. Most art follows that process of you go establish rules, follow the rules, break the rules. It's how art works. So yeah, giving your players all these rules, you can kind of treat it as a very kind of classical version of things. One thing, the reason I just got caught up, one thing I just noticed, if you hover over the pictures, there are little prompts that come up. And I don't know if these are, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone that actually knows this in the comments down below, I think these are auditory descriptions of the pictures meant for visually impaired, which is something that is absolutely essential. People should do this so much more. Have descriptions of pictures, because people that are reading these books, because you can get text-to-speech things that will read books for you. So you can still take advantage of them. Text-to-speech can't do things for pictures. And so, yeah, I hovered over this and I realized that there is a description of the picture. And the way that it describes them, to me, just feels like visual descriptions, which I really, really love. Also, even if you are not visually impaired, I mean, I am technically visually impaired in the idea that without my glasses, I can't actually read anything on the pages there. I can barely see my screens. But I'm not blind in any way, shape, or form, and I can still see the pictures. And once I put my glasses on, I'm perfectly fine. But people that do have vision disabilities, they can't appreciate the beauty of this book. And so these little descriptions are really essential. I just found that out. If that is what these are, props to Critical Role for doing something that is often forgotten. Yeah, super, super great. Anyway, enough with that. Going through all that. Another thing that they introduced specifically is Hemocraft, which is blood magic. It plays a part in 2 different subclasses. I like the fact that they introduced the idea of blood magic before they even get into this. As the subclasses, it's really interesting. They deal with a lot of the questions people would have about it. It's great. Like I said, the subclasses, I'm going to go through the subclasses in D&D Deep Dives. They all look really interesting and fun. I haven't found any that I'm like, ooh, that's bad. So yeah, I'm interested to see how this stuff goes. The backgrounds, like I said, are really, really well made. They look just like backgrounds that you would see in the Player's Handbook or any other WotC thing. They've got personality traits, ideal bonds and flaws and things like that. Like they're really, really well made. And then they have new feats. I will be doing a D&D deep dive on these new feats. Overall, I like them. I haven't seen a single one where I'm like, oh, no. Like when Strixhaven came out and I talked about how broken those feats are, and the backgrounds, I'm like, no, this is dumb. There's none of that in here. These are all really interesting, really fun. They let you do new things. They fit the idea of a 5th edition feat. I love it. So yeah, that is Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Game Master's Toolkit. Most GMs, when they open this up, they will skip over the first page. This is a super bad idea. The first page starts with a little introduction, and then the first big title on it is Creating Adventures. This is a really, really good how-to guide on what things you should think about if you're building your own adventures. Talks about beginning an adventure, creating conflict in the middle, end with a reward. They're really, again, this is a single page. And it's really, really good advice. It really is. It is fantastic advice. And it's something that I think every game master, whether you are a master or whether you're a novice, you should read over this just to be able to look at the format. Is this the only way to build an adventure? Absolutely not. But this is a really good way to do it. If you don't do it this way, does it mean you're doing it wrong? No. But it is a really good way to do it. This is one way to build an adventure, and it is a really solid way to do that. I like this. This is really essential stuff. And it is done. Again, I am a trainer. This is what I did do. Despite the fact that I haven't been able to work in years, my brain will always think in a training method. And two of the most important rules of training that I have come up with are begin at the beginning and keep it simple, stupid. Begin at the beginning and remember to kiss. And this is perfectly a perfect example of that idea. Begin at the beginning. This is how you build an adventure. Keep it simple, stupid. Each section is a single paragraph. It is perfect. However, shortly after that is a thing that's called Tal'Dorei treasures. This is the magic item section. Most dungeon masters, when you ask them what they use the DMG for, it's a book of magic items. That is the largest part of the Dungeon Master's Guide. A lot of people are going to use this section just as, hey, look, more magic items I can use. And to be blunt, it's not a bad use of it. There's a lot of really cool magic items in here. I got some inspiration from some of the stuff in here. Something else that I really, really enjoy about this is the magic items are split up by cultures. So the first group of magic items is called Tal'Dorei treasures. This is stuff that you're going to find basically all over Tal'Dorei. However, the next one is Tools of the Ashari. These are specifically magic items that are built by the Ashari, are used by the Ashari, which is one of the cultures there. And they're really, really cool. And then they go in the Vestiges of Divergence. The Vestiges of Divergence is, again, it's another thing that, again, if you're anti-critical role, which I don't know why you're watching this, but if you are, if you're anti-critical role, like, oh, I've never used that. They are so intrinsically related to the lore of Exandria that you really have a hard time using them outside of Exandria because everything about them is built into Exandria. However, template. I love the idea of magic items that grow with their players, and that's what the Vestiges of Divergence are. Every vestige has 3 levels. You have a dormant, an awakened, and an exalted. And each level adds more things that it can do. The dormant version of a vestige is still a really good magic item. But the awakened becomes significantly better. The exalted becomes even better and gives you a bunch of really interesting things that allows you to play your character differently. I do something very similar in my campaigns. I create what I call character weapons, which are weapons that I build specifically for the characters that are going to get them. A lot of times the characters have some input on the weapon itself as far as what it can do, and they're designed to get more useful as you use them. And they're designed to get more powers. I specifically make them with multiple powers to the point where after a campaign is over, I plan on creating generalized versions of them where I go, this is it. At this level, you have this many unique abilities, pick them from this list. You have this many unique abilities, pick them from this list. And it's basically a very similar process of the vestiges of divergence, except mine are a little bit more customizable. And that's what you can take from this. Again, if you don't want to run a Tal'Dorei campaign, steal the vestiges of divergence. I'm serious about that. They are so well designed, and they are such an interesting idea. Even if you don't use any of the actual vestiges themselves, any of the abilities built in, use them as a template. Create magic items that have a dormant, awakened, and exalted. Change the names however you want. But it is that much more fun for players when instead of going, oh, look, I found a new sword, now I throw my old sword away and I use this new one, they get attached to the weapon that they actually have. That, I think, is really, really cool and fun. So yeah, I love that. There is a shockingly large number of vestiges of divergence as well. Again, some of them you will recognize. Some of them have never actually shown up in the show, which is perfectly fine. They're really, really good. I love them. I think they're great. And then the final section is optional campaign rules. Some of them are interesting. Some of them are not for me. That's exactly why they're optional. The alternative resurrection rules are here. They're really good. The one that most people are familiar with, because this is the one that Matt Mercer used in Campaign 1 and in Campaign 2, is called Fading Spirits, and it involves a ritual. The one I'm most excited about is called Harrowing Return, which is just a really creepy version of Resurrection that works perfectly in like a Ravenloft or a Domain of Dread style setting. It is really, really cool. I love this. It's really, really good, great. And then the last one is Taxing Return, which I believe, I don't believe is original to this. I believe Taxing Return has showed up. I think it's a relatively, not common, but I've heard of Taxing Return. Basically, every time you get resurrected, you use a point of Constitution. And like I said, I've seen this somewhere before, so I don't think this is entirely unique to this. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments below. But there's more to it than just that, but that's the basics of it. And then they have another one, the rapid quaffing rule, which is basically I use this in my campaigns just because it makes sense to me, where you can drink a potion as a bonus action, or you can feed another character a potion as an action. Normally, rules as written for 5th edition, drinking a potion is always an action. And again, I'm not a huge fan of that. I think the bonus action to heal yourself is perfectly fine. So that is Chapter 5. Finally, Chapter 6. Finally, Chapter 6, Allies and Adversaries of Tal'Dorei. This is their monster manual, effectively. But it's... and this is another thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about monster manuals or Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, things like that. There's a lot more there than stat blocks. People think, oh, look, it's another book of stat blocks. And I have seen that in other... Like Pathfinder, when they release their monster manual kind of things, that's effectively what they are, is just stat blocks. Yeah, they'll have a little bit of information in there, but generally it's just stat blocks. D&D 5th edition books specifically don't do that. They give you a ton of lore. You can read the monster manual like a book. It doesn't have a concurrent story through the entire thing, but there's so much in the monster manual that it's interesting to read, especially when you get to things like the Devil's section, the Dragon section, the Demon section. Those are really long sections that have a ton of lore in them, and this is no exception. It actually has the picture from the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting there, which I like. I love that picture. It is a great picture. It's Vox Machina, which I still have a huge connection to. So yeah, it starts off basically by giving kind of lore about how certain creatures kind of exist in this particular world. Things like Driders. Driders are a Forgotten Realms creation. And they're specifically, I believe they're a creation of R.A. Salvatore, who wrote the Dritz series of books. Dritz is his character. Driders are half, in the Forgotten Realms, Driders are half spider, half dark elf, or drow. And that's why they're called Driders. Drow, spiders, Driders. And Driders are actually a punishment from the Spider Queen Lolth. When drow do something really, really against what Lolth wants, she will curse them by turning them into a Drider. And because of that, they are really, really powerful creatures to fight, especially for low-level adventures. But they also are absolutely terrifying creatures to fight because they are the things that drow fears. They are the bad guys that the bad guys are afraid of. Like drow are intensely fearful of becoming a Drider. Having things like Driders or dragons and centaurs and things like that, just to kind of explain how they fit in this world, because every world they're going to be a little bit different, is really nice, and will help. Giantkin, again, in the Forgotten Realms, there's actually a hierarchy of giants, and Storm King's Thunder was one of the adventures. I think it was season 4 or 5 of the Adventurers League. It was like the 4th or 5th book that was published by Wizards of the Coast for 5th edition. It was all about the ordning, where basically the hierarchy of giants, about which ones were the most powerful giants, was getting reordered. If you're going to add Giantkin into your campaigns, having something about the ordning, or kind of deciding where giants stand, because different giants have different abilities and different cultures and things like that, is a good thing to have. They also have a new creature that I'm not going to go into a ton of description of, but it's called I'm going to say this wrong, Adranok, and it is super cool. Now, I fell off on Campaign 2. I stopped around episode, I want to say around 150 is when I stopped watching. And I'd watched intermittently within the campaign. So I don't know if this is something that showed up in Campaign 2. I know it didn't show up in Campaign 1. I really like it. It is a super, super cool creature that I will probably find a way to use in one of my campaigns somewhere. It is that cool and interesting creature. It is entirely unique to this. Again, using these things even in campaigns that are not linked to Critical Roles, perfectly fine. I'm sure Matt Mercer won't have any problems with me using it. He'd probably be delighted if he cared who I was. That's cool. They have 2 different versions of it, like a lesser and a greater form kind of thing. And then just a bunch of stat blocks for different things. And every one of them comes with descriptions and things like that, which is really, really nice. Again, this is something that you can read. Some of the creatures that they have in here are really cool. Things like a Mage Hunter Golem. I don't know if this is a unique thing that Matt designed himself, or if this is like adjusting from something else, but I really like the idea of a golem specifically designed to hunt mages. I think that is super, super awesome. Just tons and tons of stuff. If you watched so there was a part of Campaign 1 where they turned them in, they all turned themselves into cows. One of the stat blocks in here is a plains cow. If you watch Campaign 1, you know how hilarious that is. If you didn't, there's a cow stat block. Use it. Moving on. Again, lots of really, really interesting stuff here. Like I said, any GM can use stat blocks and flavor text them to whatever setting. One of the best encounters I ever created, and I got compliments from my players, was this thing where they had a puzzle that they had to solve, and for every round that they didn't solve it, more creatures would appear and start attacking them. And the creatures that were attacking them were these crystalline golems that would come up and just do major, major damage, and they could like shoot forward in straight lines and attack them. And after the thing, they're like, "Where did you find that creature?" I said, "Oh, they're Minotaur." all I did was I changed a Minotaur from a bull creature into a crystalline golem. I didn't change any of the stats. I didn't change any of the abilities. I just flavor texted it. And my players loved it so much, mostly because I had players that were really, really knowledgeable about D&D. And so simply by taking it and making it look different, just changing the physical description of the thing, they no longer could rely on their knowledge of D&D, and they basically had to come at these creatures like they were brand new players. And that's a really, really fun thing to do for veteran players, is basically force them to feel like they are brand new players. It is a really, really fun experience for them. Some people don't like that. They tend to be a pretty small minority. So yeah, even if you're not gonna play Tal'Dorei, these creatures are really well designed, and flavor text them a little bit, and you've got some really, really fun things. And then, like I said at the beginning of this video, the very last section is called Vox Machina, and it has a description of each member of Vox Machina. It has a beautiful portrait of each member of Vox Machina. And it is probably the nicest thing I've ever seen in a book. And I have to kind of explain why that is. Critical Role for me, and I've made videos on this. If you go to my channel and just search Critical Role, I think eventually you will find a video that says Critical Role saved my life. Critical Role, specifically the first campaign, came at a really, really rough time in my life. I was dealing with the fact that I couldn't hold down a job anymore due to my disabilities. I was dealing with the fact that I'd been forced to move back in with my parents. I considered myself a failure. I considered myself worthless because I couldn't even live on my own. Because every job I would get, I would inevitably have to quit because I would start to, it would start to become dangerous for me to work there. I won't go into any more details than that. And that was the mindset I was in when Critical Role started. You know, I can't remember if it was before or after, if it started before or after I moved back home. I think it was after, but that entire time period, I don't have great actual recall of. But I remember it being the one good thing in my life. I met friends through Critical Role. I met people that literally saved my life a couple of times through Critical Role. Specifically Vox Machina. Vox Machina was such a huge impact on my life. And reading through this and reading especially the after the epilogue portion of every one of them, it's really, really nice. This personally feels like a gift to the fans that have been there since day one. Obviously, if you're running a Tal'Dorei campaign, these are characters that might show up in your Kuka campaign. And so having the stat blocks for them, it could be really, really cool to go into battle with Keyleth, Voice of the Tempest, you know, wild shaping, or using, you know, her call lightning or something like that to do really, really cool things. That would be a really, really cool thing, especially for fans of the first Kika campaign. But it's just, I cannot really describe how this affected me. I wasn't expecting it. It was completely out of the realm of anything that I thought about. But when I started reading this, I started to tear up. It is just so it's just so good. It feels personal. It really does, and I cannot explain why. Um, I've been blessed with the fact that I I was I was there on the first day. Um, if you watch the first episode of Critical Role, you will see Trainer Jody, because they used to show chat on screen before chat became completely unreadable. They used to show chat on screen. You will see Trainer Jody show up quite a few times in that first episode. Matt Mercer, even because I was much more familiar with 5th edition than Matt was at the time, he was doing some stuff, and those of us that were really familiar in 5th edition, I just started typing in chat, oh, this is how it works in 5th edition. And chat, and Matt Mercer had to go, hey, I don't need to know how it works. I'm going to make my own decisions up here. And he kind of chastised us in that Matt Mercer kind of loving way. And I remember being just kind of blown away with the fact that what I said affected what was happening on screen, which can't happen anymore. Mostly because they don't even do it live anymore. So yeah, I mean, I've been blessed that I was there from day one, and at one point, I cannot say that they know me anymore, but at one point, every member of Critical Role knew who I was, knew what I looked like, and knew my name, because I had two things actually show up on stream. One of them, I created a cease and desist letter that I sat in, or that I wrote and I sent in, on behalf of, I can't even remember the dude's name, but Felicia Day played a character that had an unhealthy obsession with another NPC, and so I made up this joke restraining order that got sent in. And Matt Mercer, a very long time ago, they used to do this thing called Critmas, where they would open up presents on stream. They can't do it anymore because they just get too much. But during Critmas for this episode, they opened up the letter and they read it, and everyone thought it was really funny. And then for their, I believe it's for their 50th episode special, I sent Matt Mercer a gold medal that we had gotten from doing who's you? What's it? Extra Life. The Critters and Team Human had teamed up and played D&D for 48 hours for Extra Life, and we raised money for the Los Angeles Children's Hospital in honor of Critical Role. And so I sent them the gold medal that we won, because we raised like $4,000 that year. And I made a video, and because I knew Zach, I still know Zach somewhat. We don't talk very much, but he knows me and I know him. Zach agreed to play this video for them. And so the entire cast got to listen to me talk about the amazing things that we did and thank them for everything that they had done. And I made the cast cry. Some of you may want to make some members of the cast cry for nefarious purposes. I made them cry tears of joy. And for a brief moment in time, every member of the cast of Critical Role knew who I was, knew what I looked like because they saw my face, and they knew my name. And Liam O'Brien specifically mentioned that he remembered seeing me in the first episode. And that is still one of the most special experiences I've ever had. And this just feels like a little thank you to people like me that have been here for so long and have seen Critical Role change so much. This just feels like, hey, we still remember you. And it's just so wonderful. There really isn't another way to describe it other than it is just wonderful. And then they have an index, and then another thing that's really nice is they have what's called an index of artists, which just basically shows every single person that contributed art. They list the page numbers, they list, it looks like their Twitter handle on here, and then a website if they had it. So if you're wondering who made all these amazing drawings, it's all there. So, final thoughts. This, as I said before, this is probably one of the best campaign books that has been released for 5th edition. It is beautifully created, wonderfully well written. The new options in there are, I haven't seen every single one of them, so I may eat these words later, but from the ones that I've looked over very quickly, they seem balanced, they seem interesting, they seem fun. The amount of lore in here is astounding. Just the vast, this is a living, breathing world, and this book brings it to life. And for me, that is the highest compliment I can give a creator, is if they create their own world and it feels alive, then they have done something truly astounding. And that's what this book has done. So I 100% believe this is a solid purchase. If you're a fan of Critical Role, you need to get this book. If you are not a fan of Critical Role, you should still probably get this book. If you like D&D 5th edition, you should probably get this book. If you don't like D&D 5th edition, you should still get this book. I think the things that they do in here can be used in any rule system. A lot of it might need tweaking, especially if you get to some of the more interesting, unique rule systems. But you can always learn something from really well-made products, and there's a lot you can learn from this book. So, overall, my recommendation, pick up this damn book. It is so good. Critical Role deserves this to be a bestseller, due to the fact that it's not being sold anywhere that reports to bestseller lists. I don't think this quote unquote can be a bestseller, but it deserves to sell out its first, second, third, fourth, and fifth printings. It's just that good. So yeah, thank you for tuning in to this very, very long review. These are how my in-depth reviews goes. Like I said yesterday, I put one up for the Power Rangers RPG system. Today is this one. Tomorrow I'm going to try and have my first D&D deep dive on one of these things, so tune in for that. As always, if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. Let me know, what is your favorite Critical Role memory? I told you mine. It's me giving them that medal and seeing the cast cry. I know it seems kind of macabre that my best memory is when they're crying, but it was very special to me. Yeah, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, this is all for me today, and I will see you guys in the next time, all right? Bye-bye.